This lecture will be on how to write a bibliography and works cited page. If you're fairly familiar with that, then you might not even need this lecture because there's also information in the reader about it. But don't automatically jump to that assumption that you don't want to watch this or listen to this lecture, because there are going to be some details that I'm being quite picky about for your upcoming papers, for your research paper. What is the purpose of a bibliography and works cited page? Most people know that it's to give more information about the sources you use by giving credit to the original authors. But what some people don't realize that a bibliography and works cited page are for is to make suggestions for further reading. In fact, you might want to consider this for your own research. If you find a source that you really like, you might want to look at that person's bibliography to see if there are other sources on there that you might be able to research that are of interest to you and that might be helpful for your paper. What is the difference between a bibliography and a works cited page? Well, sometimes the terms are used synonymously. I even make that mistake sometimes, but they're not actually the same thing. When people do make a distinction, the distinction is this. The bibliography includes all the sources you use to even help you prepare for your paper. That might mean you read something and it got you thinking about your topic in a certain way, even if you didn't directly use it in your paper. So for your upcoming papers, I'm requiring you to find far more sources for your bibliography than you actually have to use for your works cited. Does that make sense? Now, the works cited page includes only the sources you directly quoted, paraphrased, or summarized. That means you use them directly in your paper some way. So, the works cited page is not something completely different from your bibliography. It's a subset of the bibliography. So you might even be able to copy and paste the sources that are on your works cited page into your bibliography. For example, let's say your bibliography has 8 sources. Your works cited page might have 3 of those 8 sources also included. You should also include primary sources in both types of references. In other words, in your bibliography and your works cited page. What do we mean by primary sources? Well, for any paper that's a research paper, there are both primary and secondary sources. The primary source is the text that you are going to analyze. So if you're analyzing a movie, that's your primary source. If you're analyzing songs, those are your primary sources. If you're analyzing a rule book for sports, that's one of your primary sources. You should assume that your reader is familiar with your primary sources, but you still have to cite them and put them in your bibliography and works cited page. Secondary sources are any sources that talk about your text or have different theories that you can use about your text. So those are the ones that you research to help you come up with some kind of analysis about your text. They are not the text itself, if that makes sense. You should not assume that your reader knows what your secondary sources are. The overall formatting for a bibliography is important. There's a sample in the reader. There are a couple of adjustments that I didn't get to update, but I just saw that things have changed in the past few years. And I'll talk about them in a second. First of all, make sure you alphabetize by last name of author. This is a big mistake students make. They forget to alphabetize because what they do is they use online citation machines like EasyBib or Citation Machine. I'm fine that you use those machines because I actually use that kind of software too. Why not if they can do a good job? But often those software programs do not alphabetize. They're just concerned about each individual entry in your bibliography. So this page, the overall formatting page, is very important because those kinds of software programs don't address these things in particular. You need to label the page bibliography or works cited and center that at the top of the page. Don't use any special formatting like italics or quotation marks around the word bibliography or the words works cited. Double space it just like you would a paper. This is the part that in the reader it's wrong. In the reader it's single spaced and then it's double spaced between entries. Now the rule is just double space everything just like a paper. If there is more than one line for an item, like if you have a book's information and it goes to a second or third line, then you have to indent the subsequent lines by 1/2 inch. See the reader for this part. The indentation is correct in there. If you use more than one work from an author, for example, let's say you had Naomi Rockler and you have 2 of her articles, then you can use the hyphen, 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 3 hyphens in a row for the author's name after the first time. Again, there's a sample of this in the reader. Include the medium of publication. This is not in the reader. Again, this has been updated. So, after you do all of your bibliographic information, and then you have a period, then after that you have to either put print period or web period, meaning did you find it through hard copy or did you find it on the internet? Finally, do not just use URLs in your bibliography. If you just give me a list of URLs for your bibliography or works cited page, you will get an F for your research grade. I cannot stress this enough. I have not been picky about these in your paper so far, but for your research paper, you have to have all these technical pieces correct. So then there's formatting for different sources. There are just too many different types of sources that can be formatted to review here. I mean, this would be a long tutorial, and I don't think any of you guys want that. So have a good resource for MLA documentation. You can either have one in print or online. A good online source, but it's not comprehensive, can be found at the URL I've provided. So that's a good temporary solution, but I really do encourage you, especially for your college career, to have a handbook, a printed handbook that has MLA documentation and formatting. Or if you're in a discipline that doesn't use MLA very often, find one for that. APA is another big one, Chicago style. So find out what your major usually uses and then find a handbook for that. What I did do is I included examples in the reader for some of the most common types of sources you might be using for your upcoming papers. So you can look that there, or if you have a source that's not listed there, then go ahead and look online. So let's practice one. You'll need to know this one anyway if you're using anything from the course reader. Let's take a work in an anthology. An anthology is a collection of different texts. So the way I have this set up in the reader is I show you what the basic formatting is without the information filled in yet. So for a work in an anthology, you'd have the author's last name, comma, then the author's first name, period. Then you have the title of the essay in quotation marks, period. Then you have the title of the collection in italics. Why is one in quotation marks and one in italics? You have to review the MLA documentation tutorial to find that out. Then you put ED, meaning edited, and then you put the editor's name. For some reason, you don't put last name, first name. In this case, you put first name, last name. I don't know why. It just happens like that. Then you put the city of publication, colon, the publisher, comma, and the year it was published. Then you put the page range of the entry. In other words, if you quoted from page 42 of the article, you don't just put page 42 here. You put the beginning, the first and the last page that this whole article took in that collection. Okay? Then you put the medium of publication. So, if you use an article from the course reader, you should consider it a work in an anthology because it's a collection of essays. So let's take Ducille's article. You would put Ducille, comma, and period. Then the title of her article is Dies and Dolls, etc. Then you would put course reader, because I don't really have a name for ours. Just put EWRT2 course reader in italics, because that's the name of the anthology, not the name of the article. Then you put edited by Lydia Hearn. You put Cupertino, just assume that's where I made or published the reader. And then you put De Anza College, comma, 2013. Then notice 196 to 205. Here's what I meant by the page range. Let's say you quoted page 197 of Ducille. You would not just put 197. Here you would put 196 to 205 because that's the pages it takes up in the reader. And then you would put print. I guess you could put web if you only use the electronic version. So what do you do if you quoted page 197 of Ducille? Where do you show that? You show that in your in-text citation, which you learned about in the tutorial on MLA documentation. So the way these two things work together is your in-text citations are telling you specifically what page and author you used. Your bibliography and works cited is saying if you want to know more about that particular quote, then you can look in your bibliography or works cited list for the fuller information. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's it. It's very simple. I just thought it might be easier for you to listen to this than to have to read a bunch of information. Thanks. Bye.